There's always one neighbor who watches a little too closely. In our quiet suburban street where lawns were manicured and mailboxes gleamed in the morning sun, no one expected trouble. But sometimes, appearances are exactly that, only appearances. And on this street, Karen had perfected the art of watching without anyone ever realizing. Karen, the HOA's self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards, had always carried herself with an air of authority. To new neighbors, she was the friendly face who handed out welcome baskets and reminded everyone politely about fence heights and paint colors. But behind that warm smile and polite nod, she had a secret, a fixation that would soon spiral into something far more complicated, far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. It started innocently enough. A suspicious glance here, a raised eyebrow there. A neighbor parking too close to the curb, kids playing loudly after dark. Karen would write notes, send reminders through the HOA newsletter, or quietly knock on doors with a friendly concern. But then came the cameras. Tiny, almost invisible cameras strategically placed in her home, pointed toward windows that faced the street, the alley, even the occasional backyard. No one knew they existed, and no one suspected the extent of her obsession. It was a Sunday morning when the first real crime unfolded, or at least what Karen considered a crime. The Jenkins family, who had lived 2 houses down for years, had a young man named Tyler. Tyler was quiet, polite, the kind of neighbor everyone assumed was safe. But Karen saw something she didn't like, a package left on the Jenkins porch then disappearing almost immediately. Karen's curiosity, sharpened by months of watching, couldn't resist. She adjusted one of her cameras and started recording. Hours passed, and what appeared on her screen made her heart race. Tyler wasn't stealing from the neighbors, he was taking his own online shopping packages and leaving fake receipts on the porch. To Karen, it didn't matter why she saw a crime, and in her mind, justice needed documentation. She saved every frame, labeling each clip carefully, creating a digital evidence file that grew longer by the day. Then came the Miller house. The Millers had moved in only 6 months ago, but Karen already had an intuition about them. They were different, according to her carefully scrutinized observations. On a Tuesday evening, Karen caught them dumping what appeared to be chemical containers behind their garage. She didn't know what it was, and the smell suggested nothing innocent. She recorded it all from multiple angles, whispering notes to herself as if she were both judge and jury. But Karen didn't stop there. She began testing boundaries, seeing how far she could push her watchful eye without attracting suspicion. Sometimes she would walk by the houses, pretending to take out the trash, phone in hand, recording conversations, snippets of arguments, anything that could be construed as evidence. She had become a silent witness to a world most of the neighborhood refused to acknowledge. The more she recorded, the more her sense of righteousness grew. In her mind, she was protecting the neighborhood, ensuring that no crime went unpunished. But there was a darker side, one she tried to ignore, one that whispered late at night, the thrill of power. Watching people without their knowledge gave her control, a feeling that was almost intoxicating. She told herself it was for the good of the community, but even she couldn't deny the satisfaction that came from holding secrets no one else could see. By the end of the first month, Karen's collection had grown beyond the Jenkins and the Millers. The Thompsons, who ran a small home business, were caught disposing of old electronics in ways that might have violated local regulations. The Martinez family was recorded having heated arguments late at night, arguments that crossed the line into verbal abuse. Every moment was captured, every flaw documented, every misdemeanor cataloged. But the real tension came when she discovered the Reynolds family. The Reynolds' son Adam was known as the charming, popular teen who played soccer and smiled at everyone. Karen's cameras, however, captured a side no one had seen. Late at night, Adam would sneak into the garage with friends and spray paint the side of a neighbor's fence. Karen watched the footage, her pulse quickening, her fingers trembling as she saved every frame. She had found the neighborhood hidden criminal, and in her mind, the Reynolds family had no idea how close they were to exposure. It wasn't just petty crimes, though. Karen discovered things that made her blood run cold. There was a neighbor who kept large amounts of cash in a hidden safe, another who seemed to be secretly dealing in stolen electronics. One evening, she caught glimpses of what she suspected was domestic abuse through a partially open window, enough to make her heart ache, enough to make her hands shake. The line between justice and intrusion blurred, but Karen convinced herself that she was doing the right thing. Her obsession began to affect her daily life. She stopped attending social events, citing busy HOA duties. She spent hours editing videos, creating folders, labeling them meticulously. Every clip had a date, a time, a description. She even made backups, fearing that technology might fail her. Karen was no longer just a neighbor. She had become a silent observer, a recorder of human imperfection, a collector of secrets that could destroy lives if ever revealed. But Karen wasn't infallible. The more she watched, the more careless she became. Cameras were occasionally left in plain sight, strategically hidden in flower pots or behind shutters. Once she heard a dog bark directly at a camera lens and felt a pang of guilt, wondering if anyone might notice. But the thrill outweighed the fear, and she returned to her routines, adjusting angles, installing new devices, always seeking the next piece of evidence. It was on a rainy Thursday evening when her meticulous plan faced its first true test. A neighbor who had been unusually wary of Karen spotted her near the side alley. "Karen, what are you doing out here?" the man called. Karen froze, heart hammering. She smiled, waving her hand casually. "Just checking the drainage. It's been raining so much I wanted to make sure no one's yard is flooded." The man nodded, suspicious but seemingly satisfied. Karen exhaled slowly, her hands shaking as she retreated to the safety of her home. As the night fell, Karen reviewed the day's footage, and that's when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A new family, the Parkers, had moved in across the street. The cameras captured them unloading boxes, but among the boxes was something strange: equipment, large containers, wires. Karen's instincts screamed danger, but she didn't yet know why. She recorded everything, labeling it Parker's suspicious. Her sense of purpose sharpened, and for the first time, a small seed of fear planted itself in her mind. Little did Karen know, the Parkers were about to test her obsession, pushing her beyond the limits of watching from afar. The files she had collected over months suddenly felt like armor, a shield that she would soon realize might not be enough. Secrets, after all, are dangerous, especially when the person holding them is no longer just a witness but a part of the story. By the time Karen turned off her monitors that night, she felt a strange combination of exhaustion and adrenaline. The neighborhood was quiet, rain pattering against windows, streetlights reflecting off wet asphalt. She leaned back in her chair, hands trembling slightly, and whispered to herself, "I'm keeping everyone safe, someone has to." And in that moment, Karen didn't notice the faint glow of a camera lens in her own living room, capturing her every movement. Someone else had started watching. The tension in the air was thick, the story was only beginning, and Karen's carefully constructed world of secrets and surveillance was about to collide with forces she hadn't imagined. Her obsession had grown too far to turn back, and when the first true confrontation arrived, she would realize that knowing everyone's secrets came with a price no one could have predicted. Karen didn't notice it at first, the subtle flicker of a reflection, the faint shadow moving across her living room blinds. She was too consumed with her own files, her own evidence, her own carefully crafted world of surveillance. But the next morning the unease returned. Something felt off. Her cameras, all of them, displayed normal activity, or at least what appeared normal on the surface. Yet her instincts screamed differently. Someone was watching her. It began with small disturbances. A misplaced mail envelope, a footprint on the porch she didn't recognize, a rustle of leaves when no wind was blowing. Karen tried to dismiss it, convincing herself she was tired, imagining threats where none existed. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Her obsession with others had created a vulnerability she hadn't anticipated, her own blind spot. Then the Parkers' mystery began to unravel. That night, Karen watched through her binoculars as a man and a woman carried strange equipment into their garage. Wires, containers, even what appeared to be a small generator. Her pulse quickened as she recorded everything, whispering notes to herself. "Something isn't right, they're hiding something," she muttered, eyes fixed on the lens. Over the next few days, Karen's obsession reached new heights. She spent hours tracing their movements, nodding when they left, when they returned, and the people who came to their door. Packages arrived, unmarked and heavy. Lights flickered at odd hours. Karen even traced the Parkers' cars, following them discreetly when they drove away from the neighborhood. Every detail fed her growing sense of purpose and her growing paranoia. Meanwhile, other neighbors began to notice changes in Karen. She was rarely seen outside except for brief inspections. The once friendly HOA president had become an enigma, a silent figure behind drawn blinds. Gossip started to circulate. Some thought she had gone mad, others whispered that she had found something. But no one knew the truth. Only Karen knew, and only she had the footage. It was on a stormy evening when Karen's obsession collided with danger. The Parkers were unusually quiet, their usual nighttime activity absent. Karen scanned her monitors obsessively, searching for movement, for clues. That's when she saw a figure slip from the Parkers' garage into the shadows, moving carefully, almost methodically. She zoomed in, her breath caught in her throat. The figure carried a bag that seemed unnaturally heavy. Karen's instincts screamed that she was witnessing something illegal, maybe even dangerous. Determined to uncover the truth, she grabbed her camera and slipped into the rain-soaked street. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the Parkers' home. Karen crouched behind a hedge, pressing the camera to her eye. The figure moved with precision, avoiding streetlights, heading toward the alley behind the houses. Karen followed at a careful distance, recording every step, every movement, her heart racing with fear and excitement. What she saw in the alley was shocking. The figure, clearly one of the Parkers, opened the bag, revealing a collection of stolen goods, electronics, jewelry, even what appeared to be cash. Karen's eyes widened. The Parkers weren't just suspicious, they were criminals, and they had infiltrated her quiet street with meticulous planning. She recorded everything, careful not to be seen, knowing this evidence could bring them down or put her in danger. But then the unexpected happened. A neighbor, Mr. Reynolds, appeared at the far end of the alley, seemingly unaware of Corinne's presence. He shouted, startled by the noise, and the figure froze. Corinne's heart pounded. If Reynolds saw her, her cover was blown. She ducked lower, pressing herself against the wet brick wall, praying that the rain and darkness concealed her. The Parkers, however, seemed unconcerned. They quickly stuffed the bag back into the garage and disappeared inside. Corinne returned home that night, soaked and trembling. She uploaded the footage to her encrypted drive, labeling it Parker's criminal activity urgent. Her hands shook as she watched the clips again. She had proof now, undeniable proof, but with it came an even greater fear. The Parkers were unpredictable, capable of observing her patterns as easily as she had observed theirs. And somewhere in her house, a small camera lens, previously unnoticed, blinked silently, recording her every move. The following morning, Corinne was careful. She moved through her home with deliberate caution, checking for any new cameras, new signs of surveillance, but there was nothing visible. Still, the unease persisted. Whoever was watching her was patient, calculated, and clearly aware of her own habits. Corinne realized with a sinking feeling that she was no longer just the observer, she had become the observed. Her paranoia began to affect her judgment. She started leaving decoy cameras, small devices meant to lure anyone watching into revealing themselves. She changed her routines, walked different paths through the neighborhood, and even left certain lights on to confuse any potential spy. Corinne was playing a dangerous game, and she knew it. Every neighbor had secrets, every file she had compiled represented a hidden truth, and now someone was turning her obsession back on her. Meanwhile, the Parkers escalated their activity. Corinne observed them meeting late at night with strangers, exchanging what looked like packages, whispering urgently. The neighborhood, for all its calm, had become a stage for criminal activity that Corinne had only begun to understand. She took careful notes, creating a timeline of events, identifying individuals, cross-referencing with other footage she had. She was meticulous, relentless, obsessed. But obsession has a price. Corinne began to neglect her own life. Bills went unpaid, her home became cluttered with cameras and cords, and she barely slept. Her neighbors noticed her absences, her distracted behavior, the way she jumped at small noises, yet no one could imagine the storm brewing behind her walls. Corinne had turned herself into both protector and prisoner of the secrets she had collected. The breaking point came one evening when Corinne received an anonymous note slipped under her door. It read simply, "We see you." The handwriting was neat, controlled, and impossible to trace. Corinne's stomach twisted. She knew immediately it was from the Parkers or someone working with them. Her heart raced. She was now directly threatened, a target in the very game she had initiated. Her instincts told her to run, to destroy all her evidence, but curiosity, stubbornness, and fear intertwined. She couldn't stop. She had to know who was watching her, why, and what they planned next. Corinne's surveillance network became her fortress. She monitored every angle, every streetlight, every neighbor's movement. Nights were sleepless, days blurred into one another. Her obsession had become a dangerous loop, feeding fear with every frame, every shadow, every whispered conversation she captured. She was no longer just recording crimes, she was anticipating them, predicting them, preparing for confrontation. And then it happened. One night while reviewing footage of the Parkers unloading another package, she noticed something chilling. A figure, unmistakable in its movement, slipped into her yard. Corinne froze. This wasn't a shadow, a trick of the light, or a random passerby. Someone had crossed the boundary she had always respected. Someone was inside her property, inside the very space she thought was her sanctuary. Her pulse raced as she grabbed her flashlight and camera, inching toward the noise. Rain slicked grass under her feet, every step cautious, every breath held, and then a whisper, soft, deliberate, almost mocking. "Corinne, we know what you're doing." Her blood ran cold. The voice came from nowhere and everywhere, echoing off her walls, reverberating through her mind. Corinne realized with crushing clarity, the hunter had become the hunted. The Parkers weren't just criminals, they were strategic, intelligent, and aware. And now they knew her secrets, her obsession, her every movement. The files she had spent months building, the evidence she had thought would protect the neighborhood, might now be her undoing. Corinne retreated to her office, heart pounding, hands trembling as she frantically reviewed her footage. The intruder had vanished, leaving no trace, but the note, the voice, the awareness, it was all there. She was being manipulated, watched, controlled in ways she couldn't yet understand. Her obsession, her drive for justice, had set a trap for her own life. As she stared at the glowing screens, Corinne realized one undeniable truth. The story she had been documenting, the crimes she had been recording, had become bigger than her. She was no longer the guardian of the neighborhood. She was a piece of a dangerous puzzle, and the next move could be fatal. Her obsession had pulled her into a world she hadn't anticipated. And the Parkers, with their calculated moves and unseen eyes, were about to force her to confront the most terrifying reality of all. The secrets she held could destroy not only others, but herself. And as the rain poured down outside, shadows lengthened across her walls, and Karen stared at the monitors. One chilling thought echoed through her mind: she was no longer alone. Karen couldn't sleep. Every shadow in her home seemed to move on its own. Every creak of the floorboards was a warning. She sat at her desk, surrounded by the glow of monitors, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, trembling. She had built a world of secrets, crimes, misdemeanors, betrayals, but now that world was watching her, and the realization was suffocating. She tried to rationalize it. "It's just paranoia," she muttered to herself. "I've been stressed, I've been working too hard." But deep down, she knew it wasn't paranoia. Someone had infiltrated her sanctuary. Someone knew her routines, her cameras, even her thoughts. Karen had always believed she was in control, but control was an illusion, and she had learned that the hard way. The next day, Karen forced herself to move carefully through the neighborhood. She observed the Parkers from a distance, noting their unusual behavior. They were meticulous, precise, aware. Every interaction, every movement seemed calculated. Karen's stomach twisted as she realized just how dangerous they were. The Parkers weren't just petty criminals, they were organized, intelligent, and most terrifyingly unafraid. Karen decided she needed allies. She reached out to a few neighbors she had once trusted, quiet, seemingly upright families. She asked vague questions, hoping to find someone who had noticed unusual activity around the Parkers' home, but responses were minimal. Everyone was cautious, polite, unwilling to risk confrontation. Karen realized with frustration that her obsession had isolated her. She was alone in this, and that loneliness made the threat feel even more intense. That night, Karen returned home, the rain beginning again, cold droplets dripping from her hair. She reviewed footage of the Parkers' recent activity. There it was, a pattern she had missed before: packages arriving, people visiting late at night, and most importantly, a secret alleyway behind their garage that connected to the street behind her home. Karen's heart raced as the implications sank in. The Parkers had access, a hidden passage, and the ability to move without being detected. They could have been watching her all along. The fear became tangible when she noticed signs of tampering around her own property. A garden gnome had been shifted slightly. A camera lens previously hidden had been covered with tape. Her home had been breached, someone had tested her defenses, and if that was a test, what was coming next? Karen's mind raced with possibilities. She considered calling the police but hesitated. The footage she had collected over months could be invaluable, but without clear, irrefutable evidence, it could also make her look paranoid or obsessive. And besides, Karen knew the Parkers were intelligent. They could cover their tracks, manipulate witnesses, or turn the situation against her. Every thought seemed to spiral into darker possibilities. Determined to act, Karen devised a plan. She would confront the Parkers not recklessly but strategically. She would use her cameras, her knowledge of the neighborhood, her evidence. But as she prepared, she realized the stakes were higher than she ever imagined. The Parkers weren't just criminals, they were predators, and she had become prey. That evening, Karen positioned herself carefully, hidden behind a hedge near the alley. She watched as a figure emerged from the Parkers' garage carrying another mysterious package. The figure moved with precision, checking the surroundings before slipping into the alley. Karen followed, camera in hand, capturing every movement. The alley was dark, slick with rain, shadows twisting ominously across the walls. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her shoulder. Karen froze, heart hammering. She turned slowly, expecting the Parkers, but it wasn't them. It was Mr. Reynolds, the neighbor she had nearly encountered before. His expression was serious, his eyes searching. "Karen," he whispered, "you need to stop this, you're in danger." Karen's mind raced. "Danger? I have evidence, I can stop them." Reynolds shook his head. "You don't understand, they're not ordinary criminals, they're organized, and they've noticed you, you've been watched for weeks." Fear gripped her. Every instinct screamed that Reynolds was telling the truth. The Parkers were aware, and Karen had walked straight into their world. She realized with a chilling clarity that her obsession with control and justice had blinded her to the very real danger surrounding her. Reynolds continued, "You need to destroy your footage, hide your devices, whatever you've collected. If they find it, it could ruin everything. You're not just an observer anymore, you're a target." Karen felt the weight of his words like a physical blow. She had believed her knowledge was power, that secrets could protect her. But now the truth was undeniable. Knowledge without caution was a weapon pointed at herself. She returned home, mind racing, hands shaking. She checked every camera, every cord, every device. Some had been tampered with, but others were untouched. She made a decision. She would consolidate her evidence, keep only what was absolutely necessary, and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. The Parkers would not remain hidden forever, and when they moved, she needed to be ready. The next few days were tense, a careful dance of observation and preparation. Karen avoided unnecessary contact, monitored every neighbor, and documented every suspicious movement. The Parkers were active, moving as if they knew she was watching, but more cautiously now. She couldn't see their faces, couldn't hear their whispers, but the patterns were there. The intelligence was unmistakable. Then came the moment Karen had dreaded. A car pulled up late at night outside her home, a black SUV, tinted windows, engine idling. She felt a chill. The rain pattered on the roof, masking sounds, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Someone was outside. Someone had come for her. Karen grabbed her camera, her heart pounding, and peered through the blinds. The SUV's door opened and a figure stepped out. Her stomach twisted. This was no ordinary neighbor. The Parkers had arrived. She could see the outline of their faces, their movements deliberate and confident, as if they had rehearsed this. She knew she couldn't flee. Her evidence, her obsession, her knowledge, it all hinged on this moment. And yet fear gripped her. One wrong move, one slip, and everything she had built could come crashing down. The shadows shifted, the rain blurred the outlines, and Karen realized the danger was real, imminent, and terrifying. Her mind raced. She could call for help, but who would believe her? She could try to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The Parkers had planned, observed, and anticipated her every move. And now, the confrontation she had feared, the collision of her obsession with reality, was unavoidable. As the figure moved closer to her door, Karen's finger hovered over the camera button, capturing every second, every detail, every potential threat. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts, and her mind screamed for a solution. But deep down, she knew the truth. The Parkers were in control. She had been drawn into their world, and the next few minutes would determine whether she remained the observer or became the observed, completely at their mercy. And then, a sudden noise, a creak of the porch, a whisper from the shadows made her blood run cold. Karen's world, built on secrets and surveillance, had become a trap. And as the rain poured harder outside, she realized the terrifying reality. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Her obsession had led her here. The Parkers were waiting. And Karen had no idea what awaited behind her own front door. The rain pounded harder against Karen's windows, each drop a drumbeat of tension that mirrored the thundering in her chest. She crouched behind the living room couch, camera in hand, monitors flickering with shadows and movement, recording every moment as the black SUV idled outside. The Parkers weren't ordinary criminals. They were deliberate, patient, intelligent, and they had made their presence known in the most terrifying way. Karen felt the icy grip of fear curling around her spine. Her mind raced through every scenario. Should she confront them directly, call the police, or remain hidden and hope they left? But rational thought collided with instinct. The Parkers had watched her, tested her, and had likely studied her patterns as meticulously as she had studied theirs. There was no naive confrontation possible. Every move had to be precise. Every second counted. A shadow detached itself from the SUV, moving swiftly toward her porch. Karen froze, her pulse hammering so loudly it felt audible. She pressed herself flat against the couch, careful to avoid the gaze of any potential cameras the Parkers might have planted during their previous reconnaissance. Her hands were clammy, trembling slightly as she gripped the camera. She whispered under her breath, almost a prayer, "Stay calm, observe, document." The figure reached her front door, pausing. Karen could just make out the outline of a man's head beneath the hood of his jacket. He turned slowly, surveying the surroundings, and for a terrifying moment she thought he might see her shadow in the window. But he didn't. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small device, a key or perhaps a tool, and carefully manipulated the lock. Karen's stomach turned to ice. The door clicked. He was inside. She backed away, slipping quietly toward the kitchen, where another monitor displayed live feeds from hidden cameras she had installed as a last precaution. Every movement was recorded. Every sound was amplified. She could hear the muffled creak of floorboards, the shifting of furniture, the low, deliberate footsteps moving through her home. This was no random break-in. This was calculated. And Karen understood the terrible truth. She had become part of the story she had once only observed. Karen realized she had to act. She couldn't flee. The Parkers had blocked her usual escape routes, and calling for help could alert them instantly. The only option was to use her knowledge against them. Her eyes darted to a small closet in the corner of the kitchen where she had stashed emergency supplies and a backup hard drive. If she could lure them toward it, perhaps she could gain leverage, or at least protect her most critical evidence. The intruder's shadow moved into the living room. Karen held her breath, silent, invisible. Her heart threatened to burst, but her mind remained sharp. Every camera she had ever installed, the subtle ones in corners, the tiny lenses she had hidden in plants, was active. Every angle of her home was being monitored, recorded, catalogued. She could see him through the monitors, unaware of how thoroughly he was being documented. She whispered to herself almost in disbelief, "You've watched everyone for months, now they're watching you." The figure paused near the couch, reaching for her main monitor. Karen seized the moment. She slipped from the kitchen, barely making a sound, and positioned herself behind the intruder. With a deep breath, she slammed a heavy chair onto the floor, creating a distraction. The man jumped, spinning toward the noise. Karen shouted, using the loudest, most authoritative voice she could summon, "Stop! I have cameras everywhere, you're being recorded." The intruder froze, caught off guard. Karen pressed forward, adrenaline surging through her veins. "I know what you're doing, you think you've been clever, but I see everything." For the first time, the man revealed his face, a mask of calculated calm, yet an edge of tension betraying him. Karen recognized him instantly. It was Mr. Parker himself, the patriarch of the family she had been observing. He laughed, low and cold. "Karen, you've been busy, haven't you, recording everyone, obsessed with control, obsessed with secrets, and now you think you're untouchable." Karen felt her courage waver, but she stood her ground. "I have proof, I know what you've been doing, all of it, you won't get away with this." Parker's smile twisted. "Proof doesn't matter when you're trapped inside your own obsession. You've watched for months, but did you ever think someone might watch back?" At that moment, another shadow emerged, Mrs. Parker stepping from the hallway with a bag in hand. Karen realized with horror that the Parkers had coordinated this 2 against 1. She weighed her options. Fleeing seemed impossible. Confrontation was dangerous. Her obsession had led her here, but instinct had sharpened. Karen raised her camera. "If you move, I broadcast everything online. Every illegal act, every crime, every lie you've tried to hide. The neighborhood will see, the police will see, you're done." Parker's eyes narrowed. "You think you can threaten me? You're delusional, but maybe we underestimated you." A tense standoff ensued. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder echoing like a drum roll of fate. Karen's fingers hovered over the camera button, ready to capture every move, every word. She realized that for the first time her obsession, the thing that had isolated her, terrified her, consumed her, was her weapon. It had made her vigilant, prepared, unflinching. Mrs. Parker spoke, voice icy and controlled. "You've watched too much, Karen, you've crossed a line, but you can still walk away, destroy your files, and we leave without incident." Karen's mind raced. Accepting would mean losing the truth, letting them escape justice. Refusing could mean danger, physical, legal, or worse. And yet her conscience refused compromise. She had witnessed months of crimes, secrets, abuses, betrayals. Walking away was impossible. She pressed the record button, her hands steady despite the pounding in her chest. "No," she said firmly, "I've seen everything, and I will make sure it doesn't continue." The Parkers exchanged a glance, calculating, dangerous. For a long moment, the room was filled only with the sound of rain and tension. Then Parker spoke. "You're brave or foolish, but bravery doesn't win against preparation." Suddenly, the lights flickered. Karen's heart leaped. She had rigged backup cameras, sensors, alarms, all silent, all ready. Within seconds, a hidden alarm activated, illuminating the backyard with a harsh floodlight. Outside, cars approached, neighbors who had grown suspicious of unusual activity, perhaps tipped off by subtle signs Karen had left without realizing. The Parkers froze, their confidence faltered for the first time. Karen seized the moment. "Step back, you're done, the neighborhood sees you, you have nowhere to hide." Parker's jaw tightened, and for a brief, tense moment, the room seemed frozen in time. Then, finally, he motioned for his wife to step back. Both Parkers moved toward the front door, careful but restrained. Karen followed, camera rolling, documenting everything, their compliance, their faces, their attempts to maintain control even as the tables had turned. By the time the police arrived, called anonymously by Karen, the Parkers were standing calmly outside, trying to compose themselves. But Karen's footage was irrefutable. Every crime she had documented, every illegal act she had observed, every moment of manipulation was captured in crystal clarity. The police had a record of their patterns, movements, and evidence beyond question. The aftermath was both dramatic and surreal. The Parkers were arrested, their schemes exposed. Neighbors, previously unaware of the danger lurking among them, were shocked, fearful, but also grateful. Karen's obsession, which had isolated her, consumed her, and terrified her, had ultimately protected the neighborhood. Her meticulous recordings ensured that justice was served and that the streets she loved were safe once more. But Karen was changed. The experience left scars deeper than any physical wound. She realized that obsession, even when righteous, carries a price. She had walked the edge between justice and intrusion, between control and paranoia, and emerged victorious, but not unscathed. Every time she passed the Parkers' empty house, every time she reviewed her now secure cameras, a memory of that rainy night lingered, a reminder of the thin line between observer and target. Karen returned to her life quieter now, more cautious but wiser. She continued as HOA president but with humility and restraint. She taught the neighborhood the importance of vigilance, not obsession, and shared lessons on boundaries, privacy, and justice. The cameras remained, but their purpose was different now, a safeguard, not a tool of control. And sometimes, late at night, Karen would sit at her desk, lights dimmed, monitors glowing softly, reflecting on the months of secrets, surveillance, and danger. She knew she had faced the darkness of human behavior, witnessed crimes hidden behind polite facades, and survived. And in that survival, she had discovered an unexpected truth: vigilance is powerful, but wisdom is indispensable. Karen had watched everyone for months, recording crimes, exposing secrets, and navigating a web of deceit. But in the end, she realized the greatest observation of all was of herself, her limits, her fears, her resilience. The neighborhood was safe, the Parkers exposed, and justice served. Yet deep inside, Karen knew that the line between watcher and watched, observer and participant, would forever remain delicate, fragile, and unforgiving. The storm finally passed. Morning light spilled across the neighborhood, illuminating streets now calm and ordinary once again. Birds chirped, lawns gleamed with dew, and for the first time in months, Karen felt the weight of fear lift slightly from her shoulders. But she remained vigilant, aware that human behavior is unpredictable, that secrets never truly vanish, and that one day someone else might test her and the neighborhood again. For now, though, justice had prevailed, and Karen, the quiet, obsessive HOA president, had ensured that her neighborhood's secrets were no longer hidden, but revealed, confronted, and stopped, one recorded frame at a time. The Parkers' arrest would make headlines. Neighbors whispered about the ordeal. And Karen, standing behind her monitors, reflecting on the months of tension, fear, and danger, understood the lesson of her journey. Obsession can save, obsession can destroy, but courage, courage grounded in wisdom, can prevail. And as the sun rose, casting golden light across the quiet suburban street, Karen knew one undeniable truth. She had not only watched the neighborhood, she had protected it, survived it, and in the process discovered her own strength. But somewhere deep inside, a small, lingering thought whispered, the line between observer and observed is never truly gone. One day it might return. And when it does, she would be ready.